"Get out. A child like that doesn't belong in our establishment. Look at her. She's obviously lost or up to something. Children from that neighborhood don't have bank accounts here." These were the exact words Catherine Mitchell, the white bank manager, whispered to her staff as she stared at 8-year-old Belinda Washington standing innocently in the marble lobby with her piggy bank. Within minutes, Catherine called the police on this little black girl, screaming that she was disrupting their business and didn't belong in their upscale bank. The other white employees gathered around, forming a wall of hostility against an innocent child who was simply trying to make her first deposit. "She clearly doesn't belong here. This is supposed to be an upscale establishment, not a place for kids from the inner city to wander around," Brad, the assistant manager, whispered loud enough for customers to hear. "Exactly. Look at her standing there so confidently, like she owns the place. Someone needs to teach her where she belongs," Susan, the senior teller, added with pure disdain in her voice. The little girl stood still without saying a word. She was just here to deposit money into the account her mom opened for her. Yet she was facing these racist adults. But here's what these racist bank employees had no idea about. The little girl they were humiliating and the mother they were about to call? They were about to discover that Belinda Washington wasn't just any ordinary girl in the bank. If you want to see these racist employees get the shock of their lives when they realize who they just messed with, hit that subscribe button right now. Because when Belinda's mother walks through those doors, the power dynamic in this story flipped in the most devastating way possible. Do you stand against injustice and prejudice? Hit subscribe and type yes, and share where you're watching from in the comments. We'll love to know how far this video has gotten to. To start this story, let me tell you exactly who these people really were, because understanding their true characters will make what happened next even more shocking. Belinda Washington was not just any 8-year-old. She was the kind of child who impressed adults everywhere she went with her intelligence and manners. That morning, she had carefully chosen her favorite school dress, a navy blue one with tiny white flowers that her grandmother had bought her for the first day of school. She made sure it was perfectly pressed and her shoes were polished, because today was important. Belinda had been planning this bank visit for 3 whole months. Every single penny of her $47.50 had a story. There was the $20 from her birthday in June, when she specifically asked guests to give her money instead of toys. There were the weekly allowances of $2 that she earned by keeping her room clean and helping with dishes. There were the quarters she found under couch cushions during family movie nights, and the $5 bill her uncle gave her when she got an A on her spelling test. But here's what made Belinda truly special. She didn't just randomly save this money. She had a dream that kept her motivated every single day. Her mother's birthday was coming up in 2 months, and Belinda had seen the perfect gift in the jewelry store window downtown. A delicate silver necklace with a small heart pendant that cost exactly $50. She was so close to her goal that she could practically feel the joy on her mother's face when she surprised her. This little girl had memorized her account number and practiced saying it out loud until it rolled off her tongue perfectly. She carried her small blue savings passbook like a treasure, carefully protected in a special pocket of her backpack. Every deposit was recorded in her neat, careful handwriting, and she knew exactly how much interest she had earned. 37 cents so far. Belinda had made this trip to the bank 3 times before, always with her mother by her side. She knew exactly where the children's account desk was located. She knew that Mrs. Rodriguez usually worked the window on Tuesdays, and she even knew that the bank gave out lollipops to young customers. Her mother had finally agreed that Belinda was responsible enough to make this deposit on her own, and it felt like the most grown-up thing she had ever been allowed to do. But Catherine Mitchell saw none of this. All Catherine saw was a black child who didn't fit her narrow definition of who belonged in her bank. Catherine Mitchell had worked at Premier National Bank for 15 years, climbing her way up from a teller position to head manager through what she believed was pure dedication and hard work. What she refused to acknowledge was how her unconscious biases had shaped every decision she made about which customers deserved premium service and which ones didn't. Catherine lived in a world where she genuinely believed she was protecting the bank's reputation by maintaining certain standards. In her twisted mind, these standards just happened to exclude people who didn't look like her or come from her neighborhood. She had convinced herself that her judgments were based on behavior and appearance, never once examining the racist assumptions that actually drove her actions. Recently divorced and feeling like her authority was constantly being questioned by younger employees, Catherine had become even more defensive about proving her worth to the bank's leadership. She saw every situation as a test of her management skills, and in her mind, allowing inappropriate people to disrupt the bank's atmosphere would reflect poorly on her competence. The other staff members were just as problematic. Brad Thompson, the assistant manager, was a man in his 30s who desperately wanted Catherine's job, and thought the best way to get it was by agreeing with everything she said and amplifying her worst instincts. He had learned that making jokes about certain customers would earn him Catherine's approval, and he had never bothered to examine how cruel those jokes really were. Susan Clark, the senior teller, was a woman who had worked at the bank for over 20 years and had watched the neighborhood around them change dramatically. Instead of embracing diversity, she had become increasingly resentful of customers who didn't match her memories of the bank's better days. She took pride in what she called her ability to spot trouble before it starts. Mike Rodriguez, the security guard, was the most conflicted of the group. He had taken the job because he needed steady income for his own family, but he often felt uncomfortable with the way management treated certain customers. The problem was that Mike had never found the courage to speak up, and his silence had become complicity in the discrimination he witnessed every day. But there was one person in that bank who was different. Jessica Chen was a 24-year-old recent college graduate who had started working as a teller just 6 months earlier. She was still idealistic enough to believe that treating every customer with respect wasn't just good business, it was basic human decency. Jessica had actually seen Belinda before, during those previous visits with her mother. She remembered how polite and well-behaved the little girl was, how carefully she counted her money, and how excited she got about watching her savings grow. Jessica had even complimented Belinda on her beautiful handwriting in her passbook. As the hostile circle formed around Belinda that day, Jessica felt her stomach drop. She could see the fear and confusion in the little girl's eyes, and every instinct told her this was wrong. But Jessica was new, and Catherine had already made it clear that challenging management decisions was not welcome. What none of these people understood was that they were about to face the consequences of their choices in the most dramatic way possible. Because the woman they were about to call wasn't just a concerned mother, she was someone who had the power to end all of their careers with a single phone call. If you're already feeling angry about how they treated this innocent little girl, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because the justice that's coming will be absolutely satisfying to watch. What happened next was 20 minutes of the most disgusting display of racism and cruelty toward a child that you could ever imagine. And every single second of it was about to come back to haunt these people in ways they never saw coming. Belinda took a deep breath and looked up at Catherine with the kind of innocent politeness that only an 8-year-old could manage under such pressure. Her small voice was clear and respectful as she explained that she wanted to make a deposit into her children's savings account. She held up her unicorn piggy bank and her blue passbook like they were the most precious things in the world. "I have $47.50, Belinda said proudly, the same way she had practiced saying it to her mother. I've been saving for 3 months for my mommy's birthday present. But Catherine's response was like a slap across the face. She crossed her arms and looked down at Belinda with pure disgust in her eyes. Little girls don't have bank accounts. Where did you get that money? The question hung in the air like poison. Catherine wasn't asking because she was curious. She was asking because she had already decided that this black child must have stolen the money. In her racist mind, there was no way a girl like Belinda could have legitimately earned or saved that much money. Brad Thompson, the assistant manager, moved closer to Catherine and whispered just loud enough for several customers to hear. Probably stolen. Kids from that neighborhood are always up to something. The other staff members exchanged knowing looks, the kind of looks that said they all agreed with Brad's assessment, without having to say it out loud. Susan Clark nodded her head slightly, while Mike Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably but said nothing to defend Belinda. But Belinda didn't understand the racist undertones of their assumptions. She simply opened her passbook to show Catherine all her previous deposits, explaining with the enthusiasm of a child who was proud of her accomplishments. See, here's when I deposited my birthday money. And here's for my allowances, and this one was when I helped my grandma clean her garage, Belinda said, pointing to each entry with her small finger. My mommy helped me write it all down so I could keep track. Instead of being impressed by this level of responsibility from such a young child, Catherine became even more suspicious. She snatched the passbook from Belinda's hands and examined it like she was looking at evidence in a crime scene. This could be fake, Catherine announced loudly enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. Anyone can print something like this at home. The words hit Belinda like a physical blow. Her face crumpled with confusion and hurt. She had never been accused of lying before, especially not about something so important to her. Her passbook wasn't fake, it was real, issued by this very bank, with official stamps and signatures from her previous visits. Susan Clark decided to pile on with her own cruel suggestion. Maybe we should call Child Protective Services. What kind of parent lets their child wander around with this much cash? Something's not right here. The suggestion sent a chill through the lobby. Other customers started paying attention now, some pulling out their phones to record what was clearly becoming a disturbing situation. But instead of helping Belinda, most of them just watched like it was entertainment. Mike Rodriguez, the security guard, got his orders from Catherine's pointed look. He started following Belinda around, staying just close enough to make her feel trapped and scared. Every time she tried to move toward the teller window, Mike would step into her path, forcing her to stay in the center of the lobby where everyone could stare at her. This was when Jessica Chen finally tried to do the right thing. She had been watching this entire scene unfold with growing horror, and she couldn't stay silent anymore. Jessica approached Catherine with her hands raised peacefully. "Miss Mitchell, I recognize this little girl. She's been here before with her mother. She really does have an account here. I can look it up in the system if you want." But Catherine turned on Jessica with the fury of someone whose authority was being questioned. Her face flushed red with anger as she pointed a finger at the young teller. "You stay out of this, Jessica. You're new here, and you clearly don't understand our protocols for handling suspicious situations." Catherine's voice was loud enough that everyone in the bank could hear her putting Jessica in her place. The message was clear. Anyone who tried to help this child would face consequences. Jessica backed away, tears forming in her eyes as she realized she was powerless to help Belinda without risking her own job. She was a recent college graduate with student loans to pay, and she couldn't afford to lose her employment. But the guilt of staying silent was eating her alive. Catherine wasn't finished with her interrogation. She moved closer to Belinda, towering over the small child in a way that was clearly meant to intimidate. "I need to know where you live and who your parents are, right now. And don't even think about lying to me. Belinda's voice started to shake as fear crept into her words. She was beginning to understand that these adults weren't just being mean. They actually thought she had done something wrong. But she answered politely, just like her mother had taught her. "I live on Maple Street with my mommy. She works in a big building downtown with lots of meetings. She said I was old enough to come to the bank by myself because I'm responsible." "My mommy said I could come alone," Belinda added, her voice getting smaller, as she repeated the phrase like a protective shield. But her innocent explanation only made Catherine more angry. In her twisted mind, any parent who would let their child go to a bank alone must be irresponsible. And irresponsible parents from that neighborhood were probably criminals themselves. The situation was attracting more attention now. Other customers stopped their own banking business to stare and whisper about what was happening. Some shook their heads in disapproval. But instead of disapproving of Catherine's treatment of a child, they were judging Belinda and her family. "Can you believe this?" one elderly white woman whispered to her husband. "What kind of neighborhood are we living in, when children just wander into banks with mysterious money?" "Probably drug money," her husband whispered back, loud enough for Belinda to hear. Brad Thompson decided this was his moment to really impress Catherine with his commitment to the bank's standards. He raised his voice so the entire lobby could hear him. "What kind of parent sends a kid here alone? Responsible parents don't let their children run around unattended with large amounts of cash. This whole situation screams neglect." His words were like daggers aimed directly at Belinda's heart. She loved her mother more than anything in the world, and hearing these strangers attack her family was almost more than she could bear. Tears started forming in her eyes, but she fought them back because she didn't want to give these mean people the satisfaction of seeing her cry. The breaking point came when Catherine pulled out her cell phone with dramatic flair, making sure everyone could see that she was about to take serious action. "That's it. I'm calling the police. We have an unaccompanied minor with suspicious cash, and this situation has gone on long enough." Catherine's voice echoed through the marble lobby as she dialed 911. "Yes, I need officers at Premier National Bank immediately. We have an unaccompanied minor who's been loitering in our establishment with a large amount of unexplained cash. This situation is becoming disruptive to our business operations." That's when Belinda finally broke. The word police sent terror through her 8-year-old mind. She started crying, not the quiet tears of hurt feelings, but the desperate sobs of a child who was genuinely scared and didn't understand why the whole world had suddenly turned against her. But even through her tears, Belinda clutched her piggy bank protectively against her chest. That unicorn bank represented months of hard work and dreams of making her mother happy. No matter how scared she wasn't going to let these people take away her savings or her dreams. Jessica Chen watched this heartbreaking scene unfold and finally found her courage. She stepped forward, her voice shaking but determined. "This is wrong. She's just a little girl trying to make a deposit. There's nothing suspicious about a child having a savings account." But Catherine whirled around on Jessica with the fury of someone whose power trip was being challenged. "You're new here, Jessica, so let me explain something to you. You don't understand our protocols for handling these kinds of situations. If you continue to interfere, you'll be looking for a new job tomorrow." The threat hung in the air, like a sword over Jessica's head. She looked at Belinda's tear-stained face, then at Catherine's cold eyes, and realized she was trapped between doing what was right and protecting her own survival. As Belinda stood there crying in the middle of that hostile lobby, surrounded by adults who had judged her guilty without any evidence, none of them had any idea what was about to happen. Because the police weren't the only ones who were coming. The mother they had insulted was already on her way. And when she walked through those doors, every single person who had participated in humiliating her daughter was about to learn the most expensive lesson of their lives. If you don't support these bank staff's actions, Hit the subscribe button and share this video to others so they can learn too. What happened in the next 10 minutes should have been a massive warning to everyone in that bank that they had made a terrible mistake. But these people were so blinded by their racism that they missed every single clue that was about to destroy their lives forever. The first hint came when Officer Martinez, one of the responding police officers, started asking Belinda basic questions about her situation. Through her tears, Belinda tried to explain why she was at the bank. "My mommy works in a big building with lots of meetings downtown," Belinda said, wiping her nose with the back of her small hand. "She has a really important job where she talks to people about money and business stuff all day long." Catherine rolled her eyes and made a dismissive sound. In her racist mind, she assumed Belinda was making up stories about her mother having an important job. But what Catherine didn't realize was that Belinda was being completely truthful, just not revealing the full scope of exactly how important her mother's job really was. As Belinda continued talking to the officers, something remarkable started happening. Despite being surrounded by hostile adults and police officers, this 8-year-old began using words that most adults don't even understand. "My savings account has a really good interest rate," Belinda explained to Officer Martinez. "Mommy taught me about compound interest and how my money grows over time. She said building assets early is important for long-term financial security." Officer Martinez exchanged a look with his partner, Officer Johnson. 8-year-olds don't usually talk about compound interest and asset building. This wasn't the vocabulary of a child from a family involved in illegal activities. This was the language of someone who had been raised in a world of high-level finance. But the bank staff completely missed this red flag. They were so convinced of their own assumptions that they couldn't process any information that contradicted their prejudiced beliefs. Belinda kept dropping hints that should have terrified them. "Mommy always says that customer service is the most important part of banking. She says if you don't treat people with respect, you shouldn't be in the financial industry." Brad Thompson actually laughed at this. "Kid's got some imagination," he whispered to Susan. "Next she'll be telling us her mom's the Federal Reserve chairman." But Officer Martinez was paying attention in ways the bank staff wasn't. He noticed that when Belinda reached into her backpack to get a tissue, she pulled out an iPad Pro. Not the cheap tablet that most families could afford, but the top-of-the-line model that cost over $1,000. Next to it was a small designer wallet that Officer Martinez recognized as Louis Vuitton, another item that cost more than most people's rent. "That's some nice stuff you have there," Officer Martinez said gently. "Thank you," Belinda replied politely. "Mommy got me the iPad for school because she says technology is important for education, and the wallet was a gift when I opened my first savings account here." The pieces of this puzzle were sitting right there in front of everyone, but the bank staff was too busy congratulating themselves on catching a problem to see what was really happening. Then Belinda mentioned something that should have made every employee in that bank break out in a cold sweat. "My mommy taught me about FDIC insurance and how banks have to follow federal regulations about customer treatment," Belinda said casually. "She said discrimination based on age or race is against the law, and banks can lose their licenses for it." This wasn't a typical 8-year-old talking about a princess movie or her favorite toy. This was a child who had been raised in conversations about federal banking regulations and discrimination law. But Catherine was so focused on her power trip that she completely ignored what Belinda was actually saying. Officer Johnson was starting to feel uncomfortable about the whole situation. In his 10 years on the force, he had never been called to arrest a well-spoken child who was trying to make a legitimate bank deposit. Everything about this felt wrong. "Ma'am," Officer Johnson said to Catherine, "are you sure this situation requires police intervention? The child seems to have proper documentation and a legitimate account." But Catherine doubled down on her position. "Officer, you don't understand the kind of neighborhood this bank serves. We have to maintain certain standards, and unaccompanied minors with large amounts of cash create liability issues." What Catherine didn't realize was that her words were digging her grave deeper with every sentence. She was openly admitting to discriminatory practices in front of police officers and a room full of witnesses with cell phones. That's when Belinda made the request that was about to change everything. "Can I please call my mommy?" Belinda asked through her tears. "She told me if anyone was ever mean to me or made me feel unsafe, I should call her right away." Catherine's response was pure mockery. She actually laughed as she replied, "Sure, let's call Mommy. Maybe she can come pick up her little troublemaker." Catherine was so confident that this phone call would prove her point about irresponsible parenting that she didn't even consider what might happen if Belinda's mother turned out to be someone with real power. Belinda pulled out her phone, another expensive item that should have been a warning sign, and dialed a number she knew by heart. The bank lobby fell silent as everyone waited to hear this conversation that Catherine was so sure would vindicate her actions. "Mommy?" Belinda's voice was small and scared. "They won't let me put my money in my account. They said I don't belong here, and they called the police on me." There was a pause as Belinda listened to her mother's response. Then she said something that should have made every employee in that bank immediately start updating their resumes. "Yes, Mommy, I'm at your bank." The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't exploded yet, but instead of panicking, the staff members just dismissed what they had heard. Brad actually started laughing. "Kid thinks her mom owns the bank," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "What's next? Is her dad the mayor?" Susan joined in the mockery. "These children and their fantasies. Someone needs to teach her about reality." But Jessica Chen, who had been quietly watching this entire situation unfold, noticed something that the others missed. When Belinda said, "Your bank," her voice didn't have the tone of a child making up a story. It had the calm confidence of someone stating a simple fact. Jessica had also been paying attention to all the expensive items in Belinda's possession. Her sophisticated vocabulary and her detailed knowledge of banking procedures. Unlike her colleagues, Jessica was starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, this little girl wasn't the problem they thought she was. As Belinda continued her phone conversation, she mentioned details that should have sent warning signals through every brain in that building. "The mean lady's name is Catherine Mitchell," Belinda whispered into the phone. "She's the one who called the police and said I don't belong here." Anyone paying attention would have noticed that Belinda said Catherine's full name with the kind of precision that suggested she knew exactly who Catherine was. Not just as a random bank employee, but as someone whose name and position were familiar to her family. Catherine, however, was too busy feeling vindicated to notice the danger signs. "See, officers," she said smugly. "The child is already making accusations and causing drama. This is exactly why we have policies about unaccompanied minors." But Officer Martinez was watching Belinda's face during the phone call, and what he saw didn't match Catherine's description of a troubled child causing problems. Despite everything that had happened, Belinda maintained her polite composure. She answered every question respectfully, never raised her voice, and showed the kind of emotional control that most adults would struggle with in a similar situation. "Mommy's coming right now," Belinda announced after hanging up the phone. "She said she'll be here in 5 minutes. Catherine smirked with satisfaction. "Good, then we can have a conversation with your mother about proper supervision and appropriate behavior in professional establishments." What Catherine didn't understand was that she had just announced her own professional execution. Because the woman who was about to walk through those doors in 5 minutes wasn't just any concerned parent coming to collect her child. She was the one person in the entire city who had the power to shut down that bank with a single phone call. And after what they had done to her daughter, she was absolutely going to use that power. As those 5 minutes ticked by, Jessica noticed something else that should have terrified everyone in that building. Belinda's tears had stopped, and she was standing with a quiet confidence that seemed completely out of place for a child who had just been humiliated and threatened with arrest. It was the confidence of someone who knew that justice was coming. If you want to see these racist bank employees get the shock of their lives when they realize exactly who they've been messing with, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what happens when Belinda's mother walks through that door will leave you absolutely speechless. What happened next was the most devastating 10 minutes in the history of Premier National Bank. The moment that would expose years of systemic racism and destroy multiple careers in the span of a single conversation. The elevator doors opened like the curtains on a stage where justice was about to be served. And when Victoria Washington stepped out, the entire atmosphere of that bank lobby changed in an instant. She was absolutely stunning. A 35-year-old black woman who commanded attention the moment she entered any room. Her custom-tailored business suit was the kind that only people with serious money could afford, cut perfectly to show both elegance and authority. Her hair was styled in an expensive professional cut, and she wore the kind of confidence that only comes from knowing you have real power in this world. But it wasn't just her appearance that made everyone freeze. It was the way she moved. Her heels clicked across that marble floor with the kind of authority that made people instinctively straighten their posture and pay attention. This wasn't someone who was coming to beg for her child's freedom. This was someone who was coming to claim what was rightfully hers. Every single customer in that lobby stopped what they were doing and stared. Conversations died mid-sentence. Phone calls were forgotten. Even the police officers turned to look at this woman who had just transformed the energy of the entire building with her presence. The first person to recognize exactly who had just walked into their lives was someone Victoria had never even met. The bank president, Robert Harrison, had been hiding in his office during this entire situation, letting Catherine handle what he assumed was a minor disturbance. But when his secretary whispered something in his ear, his face went completely white. He rushed out of his office so fast that he nearly tripped over his own feet. Robert Harrison had only seen Victoria Washington in photographs and business magazines, but he knew instantly that the most powerful person in the city's financial world had just walked into his bank while his staff was humiliating her child. Jessica Chen, who had been watching this entire nightmare unfold while feeling powerless to stop it, immediately recognized Victoria from the financial news websites she read. She whispered to herself in absolute shock, "Oh my God, that's Victoria Washington." But Catherine Mitchell, the woman who had started this entire disaster, didn't recognize her at all. Catherine was so focused on her authority trip and so convinced that she was dealing with just another troublemaking parent that she actually stepped forward aggressively, ready to confront this woman who had dared to interrupt her control of the situation. Victoria's eyes swept the scene in front of her, like a laser scanning for targets. She saw her 8-year-old daughter standing in the middle of a hostile crowd, tears still on her cheeks, clutching her piggy bank like it was a lifeline. She saw 2 police officers who looked increasingly uncomfortable about their presence here. She saw bank employees with expressions that ranged from smug satisfaction to growing panic. And in that moment, Victoria Washington made a decision that would haunt every person in that room for the rest of their careers. Her voice cut through the silence like a sword through paper. It wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. It carried the kind of authority that made people listen whether they wanted to or not. "Officers, release my daughter immediately." The command wasn't a request. It wasn't a plea. It was an order from someone who expected to be obeyed without question. But Catherine Mitchell was so drunk on her own power that she still didn't understand what was happening. She actually stepped between Victoria and the police officers, her face red with indignation. "Ma'am, You can't just waltz in here and start making demands. We're handling a situation involving an unaccompanied minor with suspicious." Victoria's response stopped Catherine mid-sentence and sent shockwaves through every person in that building. "I can do whatever I want, Miss Mitchell. This is my bank." The words hit that marble lobby like a physical explosion. You could actually hear the collective gasp from every customer and employee as the reality of what Victoria had just said began to sink in. Catherine's face went from red to white in the span of 2 seconds. Brad Thompson's mouth fell open so wide you could have fit a baseball in it. Susan Clark made a small choking sound like she was trying to breathe underwater. Mike Rodriguez looked like he had just seen his entire future crumble before his eyes. But Victoria wasn't finished destroying their world yet. She walked directly to Belinda, her heels clicking like a countdown to Judgment Day. When she reached her daughter, she did something that showed everyone in that room exactly what kind of person she really was. Before addressing the adults who had terrorized her child, before unleashing the fury that was clearly building inside her, Victoria Washington got down on one knee so she could look her daughter in the eyes. "Are you okay, baby?" Victoria's voice was gentle now, filled with the kind of love that only a mother could express. "Did anyone hurt you?" Belinda threw her small arms around her mother's neck, finally able to release all the fear and confusion she had been holding inside. "Mommy, they said I don't belong here. They said my money was fake, and they called the police on me." Victoria held her daughter for a moment, letting Belinda feel safe again. But as she stood back up to her full height, every person in that room could see the transformation taking place. The gentle mother was becoming something much more dangerous. A powerful woman who had just watched her child be victimized by racism and who had the power to do something about it. When Victoria turned to face Catherine Mitchell, her eyes were like ice. Her voice was calm, controlled, and absolutely terrifying in its quiet fury. "You called the police on an 8-year-old making a legitimate transaction?" Catherine tried to stammer out some kind of explanation, but Victoria continued speaking with the precision of someone who was used to destroying people with words. "Miss Mitchell, do you have any idea what you've just done? Do you understand that my daughter has been banking here for 2 years? That she has made deposits with me standing right beside her multiple times?" That's when Robert Harrison, the bank president, finally found his voice. "Miss Washington, I am so deeply sorry. This is completely unacceptable, and I assure you that we will." But Victoria held up one hand and the most powerful man in that building immediately fell silent. "Mr. Harrison, I want to see the security footage from today. Right now, I want every camera angle that shows how your staff treated my daughter." The security footage told a story that was even worse than Victoria had imagined. Camera after camera showed Belinda being surrounded, intimidated, and humiliated by adults who should have been protecting her. The footage showed Catherine's discriminatory language, Brad's racist assumptions, Susan's cruel suggestions, and Mike's intimidation tactics. But the footage also showed something else that made Victoria's blood boil even hotter. It showed that this wasn't the first time these employees had treated minority customers differently. The cameras had captured months of discriminatory behavior that the bank's leadership had either ignored or encouraged. As the footage played on the security monitors, Victoria Washington began to reveal exactly who she was and why everyone in that room should have been terrified from the moment she walked through those doors. "My name is Victoria Washington, and I am the CEO and founder of Washington Financial Group. I own 67% of the shares in this bank building. I am the primary shareholder in Premier National Bank. I sit on the board of directors of 3 other major financial institutions in this city." With each revelation, the faces around her grew paler and more terrified. These people had just realized that they hadn't merely insulted a customer. They had humiliated the child of the most powerful person in their industry. "My daughter has had her children's savings account here for 2 years. Every deposit has been legitimate money from birthdays, allowances, and small jobs around our house. She knows her account number by heart because I taught her to be financially responsible from an early age. Victoria turned to look directly at Catherine, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than any scream. "And you, Miss Mitchell, just called the police on my child because you decided that a black girl couldn't possibly have $47 legitimately." The silence in that lobby was deafening. Every person in that building understood that they were witnessing the end of several careers and possibly the end of the bank itself. Victoria Washington had just revealed that the child they had terrorized wasn't just any 8-year-old. She was the daughter of the woman who could shut down their entire operation with a single phone call. And from the look in Victoria's eyes, that phone call was about to happen very soon. If you want to see these racist employees face the consequences of their actions in the most satisfying way possible, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. Because what Victoria Washington does next will restore your faith that justice still exists in this world. But here's what I want to know from you. If you had Victoria's power in this situation, what would your first move be? Because what she did next was more devastating than anything these people could have imagined. What happened in those final 5 minutes wasn't just about firing a few racist employees. It was about justice, accountability, and making sure that no other child would ever have to experience what Belinda had gone through. And the way Victoria Washington handled it showed exactly why she had become one of the most powerful people in the financial world. The immediate consequences hit like a tsunami. Catherine Mitchell, who had been so confident in her authority just minutes before, suddenly realized that her entire career was crumbling before her eyes. The color drained from her face as the full weight of what she had done crashed down on her. She started panicking, her hands shaking as she tried to formulate some kind of explanation that might save her job. "Miss Washington, I had no idea. I was just following bank protocol for unaccompanied minors. I never meant." But her words were falling on deaf ears. Victoria had already made her decision about Catherine's future, and nothing she could say now would change what was about to happen. Brad Thompson and Susan Clark immediately started trying to distance themselves from the situation, throwing Catherine under the bus to save their own careers. Brad stepped forward with his hands raised defensively. "Miss Washington, I want you to know that I was just following Miss Mitchell's lead. Bank policy clearly states that we should be cautious with unusual situations involving minors." Susan nodded frantically, desperation creeping into her voice. "Exactly. We were told this was standard protocol. I've never had any personal issues with anyone. This was purely about following procedures." Mike Rodriguez, the security guard, tried the classic defense that has never worked for anyone in the history of accountability. "Ma'am, I was just following orders. When management tells security to monitor a situation, that's what we do. I don't make the decisions about who belongs here and who doesn't." But one person in that lobby did something that surprised everyone, including Victoria herself. Jessica Chen stepped forward, her voice clear and strong despite the fear she was obviously feeling. "Miss Washington, I want you to know that I recognized your daughter from her previous visits. I tried to help her, but I was told to stay out of it. I should have done more to protect her, and I'm sorry I didn't find the courage to speak up stronger." Victoria looked at Jessica with something that might have been respect. Here was a young woman who was taking responsibility for her actions instead of making excuses, and who was honest about her own failures instead of trying to pretend she had done nothing wrong. But Victoria wasn't finished with the others yet. She turned her attention to each staff member individually, her voice calm but devastating as she addressed their behavior with surgical precision. "Miss Mitchell, in the 15 minutes I've been reviewing security footage, I've watched you assume that my daughter was a criminal, based solely on the color of her skin. I've heard you suggest that she was lying about having a legitimate account, despite her having proper documentation. I've seen you intimidate an 8-year-old child in ways that would be considered harassment if done to an adult. Catherine tried to interrupt, but Victoria continued without pause. Mr. Thompson, I watched you whisper that my daughter's money was probably stolen within 30 seconds of seeing her. You made jokes about children from that neighborhood causing trouble. You questioned my parenting abilities based on racist assumptions about black families. Brad's face went red as he realized that every discriminatory comment he thought was private had been caught on camera. Miss Clark, you suggested calling Child Protective Services on a family you know nothing about, simply because you couldn't believe that a black child might have responsible parents. You participated in creating a hostile environment for a customer who had every right to be here. Susan started crying, but Victoria wasn't moved by tears from someone who had shown no compassion for her daughter's tears. And Mr. Rodriguez, you used your position as security to intimidate and trap a small child who posed no threat to anyone. You made an 8-year-old feel like a criminal for the crime of being black in your presence. But Victoria wasn't just interested in punishing these individuals. She wanted to understand if this was part of a larger pattern of discrimination that other customers had experienced. I want to know if anyone else in this lobby has witnessed similar treatment of minority customers at this bank. The response was immediate and heartbreaking. Customer after customer stepped forward to share their own experiences or incidents they had witnessed. An elderly Latino man talked about being followed around the bank by security every time he made a deposit. A young black professional woman described being questioned extensively about the legitimacy of her business account. A Middle Eastern family recounted how their loan application had been rejected despite excellent credit, while watching white families with worse financial profiles get approved. The pattern of discrimination wasn't just clear. It was undeniable. This wasn't an isolated incident involving one racist manager. This was systematic prejudice that had been poisoning this bank's culture for years. As the testimonies continued, Victoria made a decision that would transform this moment from a personal confrontation into something much larger. She turned to Belinda, who had been quietly listening to everything that was being said. "Baby, I want you to tell everyone here how their treatment made you feel. Use your own words, and don't worry about hurting anyone's feelings. They need to hear this." What came out of Belinda's mouth next left every adult in that lobby speechless. This 8-year-old, who had been terrorized and humiliated less than an hour before, spoke with a clarity and wisdom that most grown-ups never achieve. "I felt really confused because I thought I did something wrong, but I couldn't figure out what it was. I was just trying to save my money like Mommy taught me. When they said I was lying about my account, it made my stomach hurt because I've never lied about important things." Belinda paused, looking directly at Catherine as she continued. "I felt scared when they called the police because I thought maybe I was in trouble, but I didn't understand why. And it made me sad when they said mean things about my mommy, because she's the best mommy in the world, and she teaches to always be polite and respectful." The impact of hearing an 8-year-old describe her emotional trauma in such articulate terms was devastating. Several customers were openly crying as they realized how deeply this experience had affected an innocent child. But then Belinda said something that showed her remarkable resilience and strength of character. "I still want to make my deposit, though. I've been saving this money for 3 months, and I want to buy my mommy a birthday present. Just because some people were mean doesn't mean I should give up on my dreams." That simple statement from a child who had every right to be angry and traumatized instead showed forgiveness and determination that left the adults in that room feeling ashamed of their own behavior. Victoria's response was swift and decisive. She turned to Robert Harrison, the bank president, who had been standing in terrified silence throughout this entire confrontation. "Mr. Harrison, effective immediately, Miss Mitchell, Mr. Thompson, Miss Clark, and Mr. Rodriguez are terminated. Their final paychecks will include severance pay, but they will never work in this banking system again. I will personally ensure that their discriminatory actions are reported to every financial institution in this city. The 4 employees who had terrorized Belinda watched their careers end in real time. Catherine started crying. Brad began pleading for a second chance. Susan collapsed into a chair, and Mike just stared at the floor in defeat. But Victoria wasn't finished making changes. Miss Chen will be promoted to assistant manager immediately, with a salary increase that reflects her moral courage in trying to protect my daughter. She will also oversee the implementation of comprehensive bias training for every employee in this bank. Jessica looked shocked at this unexpected turn in her career, but Victoria continued. Furthermore, I am establishing the Belinda Washington Scholarship Fund, which will provide financial education and college funding for children from underserved communities. This bank will administer the fund, and every employee will receive training on recognizing and confronting their own unconscious biases. As the business decisions were being made, Victoria noticed that Belinda was tugging on her jacket. She knelt down to hear what her daughter wanted to say. "Mommy, can we have our own conversation for a minute?" Victoria led Belinda to a quiet corner of the lobby, away from the chaos and cameras. What they talked about in those private moments was a conversation that every parent should have with their child about dignity, respect, and standing up for yourself in a world that doesn't always treat everyone fairly. "Baby, I want you to understand that what happened here today wasn't about you doing anything wrong. Some people have ideas in their heads about other people that aren't true, and sometimes those ideas make them act in mean ways." Belinda asked the kind of innocent question that gets to the heart of complex social issues. But why do they think mean things about people they don't even know? Victoria thought carefully about how to explain racism to an 8-year-old in a way that was honest but not devastating to her sense of hope about the world. Sometimes people are afraid of things they don't understand, and instead of learning about different people, they make up stories in their minds. Those stories aren't true, but some people believe them anyway. That's why it's important for us to always treat everyone with respect and to speak up when we see people being treated unfairly. Belinda was quiet for a moment before asking another profound question. "Mommy, if you weren't important, would those people still be mean to other kids like me?" That question hit Victoria harder than anything else that had happened that day. Because the truth was that without her power and influence, justice might never have come for her daughter or the other customers who had been discriminated against. That's exactly why Mommy works so hard to help other people, baby, so that even kids whose parents aren't in charge of banks can be treated with respect and kindness. When they returned to the main lobby, Victoria made one final announcement that would ensure this story had the ending it deserved. From this day forward, this bank will be known as a place where every customer is treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their age, race, or appearance. What happened here today will never happen again. And then, with the grace and strength that had made her one of the most respected leaders in the financial industry, Victoria Washington did something beautiful. She walked with her daughter to Jessica's teller window, where Belinda finally got to make the deposit she had been trying to make for over an hour. Jessica treated Belinda like the valued customer she had always been, counting her money with care and updating her passbook with the pride of someone who understood that they were participating in something important. As Belinda carefully placed her receipt in her backpack, satisfied that her birthday savings for her mother were safely in the bank, Victoria took her daughter's hand and they walked toward the exit together. Their heads were held high, their dignity intact, and their bond as mother and daughter stronger than ever. But something unexpected happened as they reached the door. One by one, the customers in that lobby began to applaud. It started with just a few people, but soon the entire bank was filled with the sound of appreciation for a mother who had stood up for her child and a little girl who had shown more courage and character than most adults ever will. As they stepped outside into the sunshine, Belinda looked up at her mother with a smile. "Mommy, I'm still going to buy you that necklace for your birthday." And Victoria Washington, one of the most powerful people in the city, felt her heart fill with pride for the amazing little girl who had faced injustice with grace and come out stronger on the other side. This story is based on the real experiences faced by countless families across America every single day. Discrimination doesn't just hurt in the moment. It teaches children that their worth is determined by other people's prejudices instead of their own character and actions. But it also shows us that change is possible when people with power choose to use it for justice, and when individuals find the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. If this story moved you and made you think about how we can all do better, please hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to hear it.